Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
He's America's dad, Spencer. Have you not gotten the memo?
I've been told, one or two people have mentioned to me that Tim Walz is America's dad, which there's just a lot of psychological baggage going on underneath that for the people that are into that message. I really am not interested in excavating. I feel that there's kind of too much there to really unpack. And
what would hope that America's dad wouldn't lie about his military service?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He represents America's daddy issues, maybe. Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and special tax-free editor of the American Mind. I am joined this week, as always, by Ryan Williams, our president and publisher, but not, as always, special treat this week by Jeffrey H. Anderson, our guest today. He's the president of the American Main Street Initiative, a think tank for everyday Americans, and he served as the director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics at the U.S. Department of Justice from 2017 to 2021. Jeff, welcome to the Roundtable.
Thank you, Spencer. It's good to talk with you.
We should add, Spencer, that Jeff's a frequent CRB essayist, and people should go read all of his stuff, commenting on elections, COVID, all kinds of things.
Agreed. Not only should they do that, they should also listen to his latest episode of the Close Read, our other podcast for,
of course,
the CRB. And yeah, Jeff, I might end up asking you about one of your most recent pieces today, that excellent piece you did for us on COVID. But we will get to that down the line. I think both of the lines of your bio that I just read will be relevant. Both forms of experience will be relevant here, because I would like for us today to play a little game that I've just invented, and it's called Will It Matter? Because I feel a bit insane. I feel like I'm having a sort of electoral stroke as I watch the news, in which news cycle after news cycle, seemingly epochal news cycle after news cycle, seems to roll past my screen. And everybody seems to have a different, passionate, radically conflicting opinion about whether anything will land with the people, whether the voters in the country are going to care about this or that thing, whether it's going to last until election day, which makes me at least feel insane, because it feels like I'm living in a virtual world full of significant events that then maybe aren't actually significant in terms of their consequences. So we're going to play a few rounds of this game. We may just devolve into talking about the election more generally. And obviously, Ryan, these questions are aimed at you as well. But we'll start with Jeff, since he's our guest. The first thing I want to ask, round one of Will It Matter, Jeff, is Trump's Twitter space. So Donald Trump went on Twitter with Elon Musk. There was some kind of technical difficulty that Musk attributed to a DDoS attack. I vaguely believe this, but only at a totally inexpert way. I have no way of really knowing whether somebody was trying to interfere with Trump getting his message out, or whether this was just part of Twitter's general kind of technological woes. One way or another, they had what struck me as a very Elon and a very Trump conversation, kind of rambled into a bunch of different topics, including like CO2 production and the beautiful chart that saved Trump's life from his assassination attempt. Seems interesting, but I was vaguely reminded also of the Ron DeSantis campaign announcement on Twitter, especially because people started saying like, well, who's really listening on Twitter? This feels like this enormous audience, but really it's just virtual world, and Trump needs to get out there and do rallies instead, or press appearances and more kind of normie among the people sort of campaign events. Shouldn't be wasting his time in this very online world. What do you think? Trump's Twitter space, will it matter?
Am I allowed to say not much?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, it's not a binary, it's a spectrum, I should have said.
Well, I would say not much. I don't think that most voters are overly swayed by what's on Twitter. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now and toss it over to Ryan.
I mean, the conversational style was sort of broke through at moments, and that's charming in a way compared to the normal Trumpy sort of campaign riff. But then he slid into that normal cadence as well, often. So not a lot of new stuff there. So yeah, I think I agree with Jeff. Not much. Jeff, I know you have a list of these. Do they matter, Spencer? But I'm gonna maybe interject occasionally, and if I steal one of yours,
we can take our time with them, please.
Yeah, forgive me in
introduce
advance.
your own.
I'm wondering, there's been this. We're not the first to bring it up or discuss it, but out of the gate, there was some consternation on the right about the pick of JD Vance, a young senator who does have a compelling biography, but hadn't done much, and maybe wasn't the blue collar working class Midwest draw that the Trump team had initially thought. And then, of course, there was the left's seemingly successful attack on JD for being weird. And all I mean by successful is it seemed to have some purchase for a little while. But do you think maybe now they're kind of glad they have JD to go up in contrast to Walz, given Walz's National Guard service now coming under some controversy about whether he'd abandoned his unit ahead of their deployment and has been claiming the wrong, he really was an E7 or an E8 rather than an E9. He was not a command sergeant major or whatever. The details aren't important. But do you think this matchup between the VP candidates favors Vance a little over Walz, or what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it probably does. I mean, it's clearly not a fair fight in terms of how they're going to be portrayed in the media. The Wall Street Journal, even the other day, in its news section, had a half page devoted to two articles on the two of them, and one of them talked about how the headline was something like Top Gun Walz, how he had been a centrist member of the House and is a gun lover and all this, and a big, very favorable looking picture with it. And then if that weren't enough, right next to it, they had an article about how Walz has a very middle class existence, and he can relate to Americans in that vein, whereas Vance is a multimillionaire, and so they have very different economic profiles. And it was pretty incredible. This is the news section of the Wall Street Journal, and so they're not going to receive equal treatment by any stretch. I thought, I mean, a point made in that article was kind of against Walz was that he doesn't even own a home, which I find amazing for somebody who's governor of a state and about 60 years old. That's not necessarily who I'd want in charge of my economy. But yeah, I think the picture of the riots in Arizona is also, or sorry, not Arizona, in Minnesota is also, I think, an important one. That when people think back of the excesses of 2020 and the left, it's hard to find a better picture of that. Walz is presiding over all of that, whereas Vance has nothing like that in his record. And a lot of the COVID responses to what have you, they keep coming out, the snitch hotline. And as you alluded to, obviously the very problematic embellishments about military service that maybe a lot of the civilian world won't care about, but certainly doesn't reflect well on his character. I think Vance is looking comparatively strong. I don't think Vance was ever going to really hurt Trump.
Yeah.
The media tried to make it a bit of a sideshow for a while, but they would do that no matter who you pick.
Yeah.
They'd drum up something. I think one of the underrated aspects of vice presidential picks, they don't have much of an effect on the immediate election, I don't think, because Americans tend to be optimists and just vote for who's at the top of the ticket. But they certainly have an effect down the road as far as who's going to be in a position to lead the party. And I think a good thing that Trump was doing was making it quite clear the establishment of the party is not in a position to nose its way back into the control of the party. Whereas, like we've seen in the past, like with Reagan in 1980 picking George H.W. Bush over Jack Kemp, these have real long-term ramifications sometimes. But the hyper progressive ticket the Democrats now have, I think, has got to work against them a little bit, even though the vice presidential pick probably doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, the narrative framing that's emerging from the Harris-Walz campaign is that a vote for Trump is a vote for the past. We're a vote for the future. And I think the easy rebuttal from, given what you just said about Vance, from the Trump campaign might be the best of the past. That is, voters tend to think their lives were better under the Trump administration on all sorts of factors, including especially economics, inflation, and all the rest. They could say, we're the best of the last 8 years of your life, and we're the future too. We have a 38-year-old vice presidential candidate, or 40 or however old Vance is.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, Jeff, about vice presidential picks signaling the future of the party. Because, in fact, this was going to be one of my will it matter questions, was just this perennial question of how much does the VP candidate make a difference? And it does seem like people don't vote for VPs, but they also kind of shape or embody where this candidate thinks the party is headed, or where it should head, and what kind of party you're going to get if you elect this president now. What's it going to look like down the line? On the military service thing, right? It doesn't. It seems to be kind of a wash one way or the other, but it definitely lands, understandably, for understandable reasons, with actual veterans of actual wars when you're revealed to have lied or embellished about that. And on the one hand, you think like, well, maybe veterans aren't exactly a group that was already thinking about voting for Harris, Walz all that much. On the other hand, veterans are a good example of the kind of person that Walz sort of exists to capture for that ticket, that he's supposed to be bringing over these more normie centrist, like I think the word that is being used in every major outlet is folksy. He's got a folksy demeanor. To what extent do you guys think that Walz is going to have success capturing the folksy demographic? And is there such a thing? And is it really up for grabs in this election?
I would say most of the folksy demographic is probably with Trump. We know that the layout in the country now is just so overwhelmingly urban versus rural, and the rural areas are Trump will win close to 3/4 of the vote in a lot of places, and the same thing in reverse in the urban areas. And then the suburbs, of course, are going to be a big decider. So I don't think he's going to win over a whole lot of folksy folks, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, he's America's dad, Spencer. Have you not gotten the memo?
I've been told, one or two people have mentioned to me that Tim Walz is America's dad, which there's just a lot of psychological baggage going on underneath that for the people that are into that message. I really am not interested in excavating. I feel that there's kind of too much there to really unpack. And
I would hope that America's dad wouldn't lie about his military service.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He represents America's daddy issues, maybe. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
And when the pick was initially announced, I thought it would be good for the Trump campaign because, as you say, Jeff, or you mentioned, the Oppo file on Walz, including so many arresting visuals, is huge. You mentioned the COVID snitch line. There's also this. I had forgotten about this. I remember it existing, but I didn't remember it was Walz who initiated it, or one of the ones who did. But he had these sort of, I don't know if they were National Guard or police crews going through neighborhoods with paintball guns to make sure people stayed in their houses. I mean, geez, I don't think that would play very well across a lot of the swing states, and even in the suburbs, where whatever people may think of Trump, I think it's probably a quite strongly held feeling amongst many suburban professionals that the way a lot of these states, Minnesota included, handled the COVID lockdowns was draconian and overkill and kind of authoritarian.
I just heard about the paintball thing a couple of days ago. Don't you think that's one that the Trump campaign ought to be bringing out and putting pretty front and center? Because you talk about weird, but also, as you mentioned, Ryan, a lot of suburbanites were not too thrilled with a lot of these COVID policies, and I think it would reawaken those thoughts in some of them. And apart from that's an pretty incredible way to use law enforcement. Walz has some strange ideas about law enforcement, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, it's unbelievably grotesque. It's like he did everything except for weld people shut into their apartments, like the CCP in China. And yeah, you're right, Jeff. Like, there's a lot of things that you would think the Trump campaign would be emphasizing and communicating more effectively right now. The other one is the tampons in boys' bathrooms, which Trump has been gesturing toward, but I think not in his most effective way. He can be a very successful branding operative. He can really stick things to people. I don't think he's gotten Tampon Timmy to really land just yet. He made some gesture about like, oh, he's really in on the trans world, which if you sort of know already the background of what's going on, makes some sense. But if you don't, feels a bit vague. And of course, as always on those issues, the left is adopting this line like, well, how does it hurt you if there are tampons in the boys' bathroom? Wouldn't it be good that you can like offer one to your girlfriend? And you guys are being so weird, obsessing over this, which is just such a disingenuous and facially deflecting way of dealing with this issue. It's not even talking about the thing that we're obviously in on, but Trump's got to redirect that and refocus the conversation on, no, this is about an extraordinarily grotesque and insulting ideology about men and women and so on and so forth. Do you guys think that his inability to refocus these conversations right now is a function of his own flagging discipline, where he's lost some of the focus that he had when he was up against a doddering Biden? Or is it more about this media firewall that has built up so swiftly and so kind of universally around Kamala Harris, where nobody's allowed to talk about her or ask any questions or say anything bad, and nothing that Trump says can really break through?
Well, I don't think not only the media wall is making Trump not talk about things. He's never hesitant to say what he wants to say, and discipline has clearly never been his strongest suit, all the way back to 2016 and beyond. But it's a good question. I don't know. I think I've been a little bit dumbfounded by how off guard the Trump campaign and Trump himself seems to have been with the switch in candidates. I think it was pretty obvious for a while that there was a very, very realistic, if not a probable likelihood, the Democrats were going to force Biden out, and that you'd either end up with Harris or with some open competition that would have resulted most likely in a candidate that might have been harder to beat than Harris. But it seems to me like the Trump campaign should have seen this coming. It almost feels to me like Trump got so used to going against Biden. It was what he wanted to do. It was sort of personal. He wanted the rematch, like Ali Frazier 2 or something. And and when it was yanked away, he didn't like that. And rather than just immediately saying, all right, I got a new opponent, I'm digging in, let's go for it. It seems like he was sort of, I don't know, he was allowing his frustration, it seems, about the loss of Biden as a candidate to kind of sap his energy and vigor for a bit and his focus, which I have found surprising. But there's not much time has elapsed since Harris became the, I guess now the official nominee, even before the convention, and there's much more time left than has elapsed. So there's certainly plenty of time to get focused on these things. But I don't want to jump ahead too much. But to me, I think this is the key element of this whole debate is that the issues are all on the side of Trump, and the intangibles are on the side of Harris. And so. Mm-hmm. So Trump has really got to push this into an issues-based campaign, I think, to have him move into a position where he's likely to win.
Very interesting. What do you think are the issues that he should, like, if you were his campaign manager, you had to list like top 3 things he should really press, what would they be?
Oh, I think it's inflation is number 1, immigration probably number 2, crime. Yeah. Just world affairs, the sort of the way everything looks like it's sort of chaotic in world affairs. Those 4 things. That's what I'd be emphasizing day in and day out. And you could toss in some of the very strange authoritarian policies, like the tampons in boys' bathrooms. But mostly it's those bread and butter issues. Ryan, I'm curious what you think about the Trump campaign and its with the switch to Biden and Harris and the pivoting or lack thereof.
Yeah, well, there's that. I'm brought back to that Tim Alberta piece from The Atlantic where he got a lot of access to La Savita and Susie Wiles. This probably ran a month. It was certainly before the assassination attempt, of course, so maybe 6 weeks ago. And his point was he kind of predicted this problem, which is to say, they seem to be completely focused on the Biden strategy, and things may be they may be a little unsettled by a switch, which Tim Alberta kind of hinted at might be forthcoming. So that's pretty much played out as predicted. There's rumors circulating today that Trump is pretty unhappy with La Savita and Wiles, and I mean the sourcing is Scaramucci and other insiders. So take discount the insider leaks for what they are, which is not exactly true insiders. But there's talk of him, ditching them or something. We'll see. I think that would be maybe unlikely at this point, given how late in the game it is. And it might be just one of these classic Trump ways of voicing putting a bit of the fear of God into his campaign team to turn the tables a bit. But yeah, they've been a little flat-footed in transition, it seems to me. Vance has been the most effective communicator out on the stump over the last week and on the Sunday shows, without a doubt. So I think that will continue and it will be good. So I expect they'll regain their footing. Trump is adaptable among his other virtues. So, and he likes what works. So I should expect them to get their feet under them. And they have a little bit of time, right? There's the honeymoon, I guess, with Harris. So I wonder what you think about this, Jeff. The honeymoon has to come to an end, I guess, at the convention, right? And we'll start to settle into 6 weeks worth of a real race. Although early voting will start, here in like 20 days in some states. So it's a sprint to the finish. It'll be interesting to watch.
I don't know. I guess I think it could be an extended honeymoon, something akin to Pete Buttigieg's paternity leave or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I don't know. I think it's crucial that the candidates actually. I think one thing that will really matter. We're asking, what will it matter? I think one thing that will matter hugely in this race is debates or lack thereof. This is the first time in half a century that neither party's candidate debated at the primary level. Mm-hmm. So voters haven't really heard from either one of these candidates in a traditional forum. And of course, Harris hasn't really been heard from at all in much of any way, shape, or form. At the convention, it'll be the same. She'll just be reading off a teleprompter. I keep wondering if, as Trump looks for a Harris nickname, if he'll end up going with teleprompter Kamala.
Didn't he go with Kamala or something at the in the Twitter space?
Comma blah.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I don't think that one's going to work.
Maybe a rough draft. Yeah, I think we're going to have to workshop some others here. Yeah,
but I think if these two actually get on a debate stage together, you're going to see a very different situation where it's unfiltered Harris, it's unfiltered Trump. Who knows how it'll go? But that's what voters deserve to see. And really, there ought to be 3 debates. There's usually been 3 debates, and in every prior race, the first debate didn't happen until the end of September. So it's not like we're remotely out of time. The first debate with Trump and Biden shouldn't count. Biden's out of the race. So there should be 3 debates and a vice presidential debate. That's what's owed to the Republic. If we care about saving the Republic or saving democracy, to quote some folks, obviously these candidates ought to be out debating, and all the more so because they didn't debate at the primary level and because Harris hasn't really faced the voters at all. So we'll see if that happens. And another place I've been surprised by the Trump campaign is at least for a while, they were talking like they weren't really sure if they wanted to debate Harris or not. When Trump went on Laura Ingraham's show and kind of hesitated about that, I think they're crazy not to insist on 3 debates. And I don't really see how Harris can avoid granting them if Trump pushes the case.
Yeah. Speaking of will it matter, debates used to be much like VPs, rather. The conventional wisdom was sort of that they had a limited effect or that everybody had already decided. And then we've just been through the most consequential presidential debate in my lifetime, certainly. And I guess the Democrats can retreat to their old line that Trump doesn't deserve legitimation by way of debate, which I get would be how they would get out of it. But as you say, Jeff, it would be smart for Trump to do what he kind of did with Biden, which is force his hand, force him to either say, I'm not going to debate you, or actually get in the ring. On the question of breaking through or ending the honeymoon, I tend to feel that this will take a belly flop almost on the level of the Biden performance at the debate. That this is really a dedicated effort, a full court press on the part of the media to circle around Kamala and dial everything up to 11. And Kamala is luckily the sort of person who could genuinely furnish one or two real corkers. Like, she could really put her foot in it a few times. And the probability of that is greatly increased the more she appears on a debate stage. But unless she does that, I think CNN and MSNBC will do everything in their power just to retain this kind of weird ambient glow around her, which this is the most, not to make this into a therapy session for myself. I do have another doesn't matter question in just a moment, but
do it matter.
do it matter. How are you going to be mattering? The thing about the passage of time is it do be mattering. This is the most black-pilled that I get about this election, is if it turns out to really be possible to shroud this abjectly unappealing, raw pit of ambition, Kamala Harris, in a haze of media hype and confected, astroturfed memery that is so dense as to actually carry her across the finish line, then I will think, okay, so none of this is real. Like, none of this matters. If that actually happens, I'll sort of lose some degree of faith and hope. But that's for another day. Here's my next do it be mattering question, which is related to what you said, Jeff, was the most important issue probably for Trump to stress, and that's the economy. He's got one thing that has managed to make headlines, although sort of in an interesting way, and that is this no income tax on tips proposition that he put forward. In a second, I want to ask you guys about whether it matters that Kamala has just copy-pasted this out of Trump's campaign and into hers. But first of all, is this an effective way of advertising Trump's friendliness toward the working man, his readiness to set the economy back on its footing? I've heard some wonks getting a little bit upset about this, that this isn't going to really make a dent. This isn't going to actually help to reset the tax code or anything else, that employers will have ways around it, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, strikes me as much more of a messaging tool than anything. And people that earn tips are the sorts of people that Trump wants to say he will help. So I'm curious what you guys think about this. Was it a smart ploy or not so smart ploy on Trump's part?
I think it was probably smart. I think tips have always been extremely hard to account for in taxes anyway. That it's extremely easy for people not to claim them or claim all of them. So you're sort of penalizing honest people and rewarding people who are not honest. There's a sort of simplicity in it of just letting people keep their tips that I think is appealing to a lot of people. I really think Trump's missing an opportunity on this one, though, not to tie it to the IRS agents. That the credible number was, what's the number? How many new IRS agents?
40,000, maybe. Yeah,
40 or 80,000, something like that. And if I'm not mistaken, Harris cast the deciding vote on the legislation that got that through. And so, if part of the argument here is we don't need the IRS poking around, let's just let people keep their taxes rather than trying to figure out if they're reporting this cash income, keep their income, not have to pay taxes on it. Part of the argument should be about let's minimize the role of the IRS, and he could quickly turn that back on Harris and say, so are you in favor of all these new IRS agents? If not, when did you change your mind? Because you were the deciding vote on the legislation. I think Trump's got to connect these things to the bigger issues so they don't just become something of a sideshow.
Yeah, he brought it up in the conversation with Musk. He did tie it explicitly. He said, all these new IRS agents are there to harass people. This is why they were hired, was to go after everyday Americans trying with their tips and all the rest. So I suspect that line will continue.
Yeah, interesting. It certainly. I mean, again, we were talking about his discipline, and we had a brief window where it looked as if we were getting some sort of new Trump. Which, if we do get debates, that may return. It was so effective in the Biden debate, his weird new restraint that he had kind of adopted, and now that seems to have vanished into a bit of a haze of distraction. But as you guys are saying, it's early days with the Kamala replacement, and he may sort of narrow his focus back again and learn how to present some of these ideas. The next question I have for you is that, okay, so now Kamala has now just full on stolen this policy platform of no taxes on tips. It's triggered a really interesting new variation on the Republicans pounce meme, which I haven't quite seen this version before. This is Republicans cry wolf or point out theft meme. That the report is the way that this is being reported is Kamala Harris has proposed a policy of exempting income taxes or exempting tips from taxes. And some people are accusing her of stealing this from Trump, as if this were a matter up for dispute that we need to really investigate and get the jury in on whether or not that's true. I mean, it's sort of manifestly the case that this has happened. And now we seem to be in this situation where everybody is fighting to be more in favor of this idea, including, I think it was Ted Cruz who introduced a bill to do this in Congress, and everybody just wants to show as much support for it as possible. Can that work, do you think? Will the Harris-Walz campaign effectively position itself as the like anti-tax? I don't even know what they're trying really to say about themselves, that they'll lower taxes. I mean, that doesn't seem like a plausible pitch, but again, everything seems insane. So what do you guys think?
I think it shows how important the Harris campaign thinks it is for there to be very little daylight, as much as possible, between her and Trump on the issues. That she's now something of a border hawk too, to hear the language coming out. I mean, I think they know, the campaign knows, Harris knows that if the issues are not in her favor, you're talking about an administration that the approval rating on this administration right now is abysmally low. It's far lower than where Trump was at when he was running for re-election, than where Obama was at when he was running for re-election, than Bush was at. This is the most unpopular presidency at the 4-year mark, I think, since Jimmy Carter. And so the trick for Harris is to run as if she's not part of the Biden-Harris presidency. And so far, she's basically gotten away with that. And
right.
I mean, part of what goes right hand in hand with emphasizing the issues is the question of, the question of how much this becomes a debate over issues is closely intertwined with how much it becomes a debate on the Biden-Harris presidency. Anyway, it's remarkable how much she's sort of viewed as at this point as new blood, and not as someone who's been part of this administration.
Yeah, it's been pretty extraordinary to watch. You mentioned the border, on the border, on crime, on gun buybacks, on
fracking.
tax and inflation, on fracking. I mean, all of these positions that she held 6 weeks ago, she now says, well, I've changed. I mean, this election, I think, will be an interesting test about the attention span of the electorate, and, where the flip-flopper charge seemed to land pretty well on John Kerry when he ran against Bush in 2004. The question is, will that be the case this time around? I guess we'll see. I mean, how gullible is the public?
Well, I think it's another reason the debates are so important too, is because with neither having debated in the primaries, Republicans will play clips of Harris in 2016 saying she's for this or that, or not 2016, sorry, for 2020 or 2019. saying this, and she says, well, in the intervening 4 or 5 years, I've changed my mind. And I think, I mean, to go back to the debates for a second, I've always thought the debates are very important in presidential politics. I've never quite understood the notion that they're insignificant. I think they've had a very real impact, at least back to 1960. They don't sway every election, but practically every close election, I think they've had a profound influence. And especially now in this day and age, when you have so many people who, obviously people don't really, the media is not trustworthy anymore. You've got two very partisan camps, one of which includes the mainstream media. And so people are getting their news sort of from their own preferred outlets. Well, the debates now, even more than in the past, are the one place you get the unfiltered version of the candidates. And they can only memorize so many answers. At some point, you're going to actually get some sense of what they are able to say or what they think on some issue, and it's a chance for some back and forth. So I really do think it'd be a disservice to the citizenry not to have 3 presidential debates and a vice presidential one from in the months to come.
You know what this situation reminds me of, where Kamala has been somehow detached from her current occupancy of the vice presidential role, is that TV show Severance, where it's science fiction and they put a chip in your brain so that every time you walk through the door of your office, your memory is wiped and you only remember having gone to work. So there arises a situation where in one body, you have basically 2 people, the person that's always at work and the person that's only ever not at work, that only activates after you leave the building. It's sort of like occupying one physical body. There are 2 Kamala Harrises in the minds of the leftist media, one of which is currently serving as vice president. The other of which, totally separately, is the prospective president of the United States. And yoking those 2 people together as one entity, which should be a matter of mere obvious fact, is kind of weirdly a messaging task. And you could do it best, as you say, Jeff, in real time, if you just had the person there and you can confront her with her previous beliefs, and not just her previous beliefs, but her present activities. I mean, the border hawk stuff is particularly funny because, of course, nobody's allowed to call Harris the border czar or mention that was her unofficial title in the press for months and months. But if she really feels that there's a problem at the border, surely there's nothing stopping her from taking action on that right this very second. She doesn't need the American people to hand over the keys to the White House in order to do that. She's in the White House anyway. It is kind of maddening. But I have one kind of wild card question I want to ask you, Jeff, in this context, as we're talking about the kind of record of each of these people. And that is COVID, because you wrote for us this essay, which you talked about also on the Claremont Review of Books podcast, but it's in CRB, which we should drop a link to it in the show description here, called COVID Catastrophes, that includes this observation that nobody seems to want a reckoning over COVID, or the people that do want a reckoning over COVID are kind of in the minority and marginalized. The general attitude seems to be, we just want to forget about this massive, traumatic kind of convulsion we all went through, which I can kind of empathize with. I mean, I don't really like to think back to that time either too much. But as we've touched upon with Walz and his behavior, his appalling kind of approach to COVID, there is this huge chunk of American history that everybody involved in this election participated in some way. You've got Trump's sort of initial friendliness with Dr. Fauci before it became clear what side Fauci was going to be on. You've got Kamala Harris and her many, many absurd and hilarious masked appearances. You've got Walz and his attitudes about it, and the sort of weird, creepy, totalitarian stuff he did. Is there some way to make COVID matter in this election, do you think, and to ensure that we kind of make this election in part about learning from those lessons, or is that kind of too far in the distance, too obscured by people's desire to forget?
Well, it sure would be nice to have it be part of the, the election consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, it does deserve a major discussion. I would think it would be something that Vance would want to hit Walz on, like in a vice presidential debate. Vance was not. He's the only person of the four that really wasn't involved in any way with setting COVID policy, so he can kind of speak freely as the voice of reason and hit Walz hard for his perhaps worst in the nation approach to dealing with it, and remind people how bad that was. I wouldn't expect Trump to bring it up a whole lot because his handling of COVID was not exactly Ron DeSantis' handling of COVID, and I think COVID certainly played a role in his losing to Biden last time. So I wouldn't expect him to bring it up a whole lot. Harris certainly won't. But I think it'd be very interesting if Walz and Vance ended up in an extended discussion about these matters, and it would be good for the American public to reconsider how authoritarian these decrees were on so many fronts, how unscientific, how much they violated even core constitutional provisions about like the free exercise of religion. That would be very, I think, illuminating to see or hear.
Oh, the Constitution! How quaint! What a what a nice thought that we would. No, yeah. I mean, obviously, that's very much up the alley of what Claremont cares most about, and yeah. I mean, there is a problem with Trump that he's kind of handicapped on this front. That I sometimes think that it's a little unfair to think of him that way, because it's easy to forget how unsettling and disorienting those first months of the pandemic were. And Trump zigged when he should have zagged, which then left him in a really debilitating position. But it's sometimes I hear people on the right talking about as if he were like just as bad as all the other COVID bureaucrats. I don't think that's a fair criticism. I think he still has a lot of daylight between him and a guy like Walz, or obviously DeSantis would be in a stronger position on this than Trump, but it's definitely, I think, worth bringing up, at least to just remind people what a dreadful degree of authoritarianism we were all subjected to.
I totally agree with you that there's all of the draconian mandates came from the governors until Biden took office, and then he issued some at the expense of private sector workers, military members, federal employees, people flying on planes. Those all came from Biden, not from Trump. But the vast majority of the amazing decrees that denied Americans freedoms came from governors. And there were only about 10 governors or so who did not engage in those decrees. I mean, a majority of Republican governors were bad on this, and all Democratic governors. So I agree with you. I mean, Trump's handling of COVID, I think, left a lot to be desired, and also from a rhetorical perspective. But the real damage was done by the governors, and then at the federal level by Biden later.
And we all maybe recall, it's now, given the nature of times, the political time-space continuum from especially in 2020. But remember, Trump was calling, I think in late March, to be, he's saying we should be unlocked down by Easter. And he was roundly mocked for it across the board. He didn't really stick with that, although he complained a lot about the enormous economic damage that was being done across the country with all the lockdowns. So no, I think there's plenty of reason there, Spencer, to remind everyone that Trump wanted to open back up. It was a big part of his Operation Warp Speed pitch as well, which was, we need to get this done because we can't just live like this. Whatever anyone thinks of the efficacy and nature of the whole vaccine process, put that to the side. But Trump wanted to reopen, and he wanted to reopen early. So he should remind people of that.
Yes, and it's really important, since, Jeff, you brought up the constitutional nature of the whole COVID crisis, that one reason why Trump, I mean, he did have problems and make mistakes in not following through on that Easter plan. But one reason why all he did was sort of complain about the damage to the economy is because for all that his opponents are constantly caterwauling about his authoritarian tendencies and his disregard for our norms and our form of government, he has always been remarkably unwilling to overstep the bounds of his executive authority. He's like weirdly reticent about the nature of the job itself and like the constitutional powers that are outlined for the president. He's always talking about how he can't overstep the will of judges. I mean, the idea has always been ridiculous that you can have an authoritarian dictator president that that you can nevertheless hold accountable in court. That's just a sort of contradiction in terms to begin with. But on COVID specifically, even if you feel, as I think it sounds like we all kind of do, that he made some mistakes, part of his problem was that he did not want, unlike Biden and unlike these governors, he didn't want to go beyond the remit of the powers laid out for him in the Constitution.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that's true. I mean, Biden had a number of his COVID decrees overturned by the federal courts and by the U.S. Supreme Court even. So there were clear abuses of power there, and that we didn't see from Trump. I mean, I think Trump made the mistake of allowing Fauci to kind of run wild, and it's tough when you're in the executive branch. You've got members of the administrative state working against you. Fauci and Deborah Birx and Redfield and all these folks. But I think if Trump had to do it over again, he'd push those people out of power, bring in people like Scott Atlas, Jay Bhattacharya could have come in, people like this, bring them in earlier. But I think I agree with you. Trump, I think, had the right instincts on COVID, but he didn't have the support from within his own administration to encourage strong follow through. And he kind of gave in to them, I think, far more often than he should have.
Yeah, no, that's well put, and it is a stark contrast with the Biden approach, which, as you say, not only did he fall foul of the courts many a time, most notably with that employment, that OSHA mandate for the vaccine, but also in other areas like with student loan debt, where he stated outright, or members of his administration would state outright, that they expected to be turned down by the courts, meaning that they knew what they were doing was unconstitutional. So that's kind of like philosophically a big difference, I think, in this election.
Well, and the OSHA mandate was also there was a mask mandate as well. It wasn't reported as much, but it was sort of an either or, vaccinate or mask. And of course, that was struck down. He tried to force federal employees to get vaccinated. He lost on that in federal court. I had a friend who was the lead plaintiff on that case, but my friend's a member of the State Department. He was ready to resign rather than take the vaccine, and the military was treated horribly. There was a lot. I mean, the amount of abuse in COVID was just incredible, and I think I do think, again, Vance in particular emphasizing this in a debate with Walz would be very helpful, I think, in terms of reminding Americans of where we went on that stuff and how to hopefully avoid ever doing it again.
I have a question, Jeff, about what are we to make of the polling right now, especially the national polling? I mean, you kind of, this stuff comes over the transom, a lot of it in headline form, and we've all got busy day jobs, but I get the sense that a lot of the national polling on Harris is oversampling Democrats by 6 to 8 points, maybe even a couple outliers at 10 points. I mean, what are we to make of this, looks like a 4 or 5 point bounce for Harris? And what are we, the last round, I think in 2020, the polls, it was much closer, especially in the upper Midwest and across a couple other swing states between Trump and Biden than the polls would have suggested on the eve of the election in Trump's favor. So how are you reading these at the moment?
Well, I think that the polls are probably relatively accurate at the moment for what they are. I think it's a testament to how much power the media has to sway public opinion. When it's remarkable. If you look at Harris's approval rating, or her favorable, unfavorable rating, it just changed overnight on July 22nd. It just bumped up about 5 points up in terms of favorable and 5 points down in unfavorable. So 10-point swing, almost literally overnight, and it's stayed there. It hasn't really moved at all. I don't know that it's going to move a whole lot. It may, if she were to have a bad debate or something, it may soften some. But right now, she's ahead of Trump in favorable, unfavorable ratings, and she wasn't before she became the nominee and got all this favorable press. So I think it shows what I think it shows the power of the press. In the end, all that really is going to matter is the 7 key swing states. And you're right. The polling was generally pretty good last time around in the swing states, with the exception that once again last time the polls were wildly off in Wisconsin. They were off by 6 or 7 points in 2016 in Wisconsin, and were off kind of across the Midwest. And then in 2020, they were right on in Pennsylvania, and they were pretty close in Michigan, but they were still off by about 6 points in Wisconsin. It's just an incredible margin. And so I tend to think that I'm not convinced they've fixed that. We'll see. I mean, Trump looks pretty weak in Wisconsin in the polling, and I think there's probably a very good chance that's simply because they haven't fixed the polling problems in the Badger State for whatever reason. I don't know why they're having such trouble polling it right now, but my best guess would be in the end it's going to play out similarly to the last couple of elections, where probably the break-even point is if Harris has about a 3-point edge in the national polling, then that's probably a pretty dead-even race. And anything above that, she's the likely winner in those key swing states. And below that, Trump is the likely winner in those key swing states.
Yeah. One thing that does strike me as probably real and not confected is the relief factor. The sense that Democrats are just so glad not to be saddled with Biden anymore. And that especially after the debate, they seem to feel just deeply, deeply down in the dumps. And then you let all that energy out, even if it's with somebody that you have to create out of your own imagination and make up a version of this candidate that doesn't exist in the real world. You still get that bump of energy and enthusiasm about having somebody that's not on the verge of death. But right, as you say, Jeff, it's like these are really kind of just news cycle effects, except for in the swing states and when the time rolls around for voting.
We moved from an election where for a second there, after the last debate, which should prove once and for all the importance of presidential debates, but it was moving sort of out of the normal political realm. It moved into a realm where the typical unengaged American who pays almost no attention to politics could tell that Biden wasn't really fit to run a donut shop. And so obviously that's going to hurt you a whole lot in an election before you even move on to any questions of political philosophy or anything. And so, yes, I think it's tremendous relief on the Democrat side to be free of that and be in an actual race. But I think to kind of sort of try to tie a bow around it, it's an election where you have a very unpopular administration. The vice president of that administration is running. And so the issue set is on inflation, immigration, crime, world affairs, all greatly favor Trump as the prior president who had better success on all of those things. I think most Americans would agree with that. But that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, with the intangibles, you've got an awful lot of centrist voters who have just been dying for a chance to vote for someone other than Trump or Biden. And now they've got that chance. And so I think to the extent that Trump can make it an issues-based election and a referendum on the Biden administration or a comparison of the last two administrations, he'll probably prevail. But if he doesn't focus very well on the issues and it becomes just a question of the likability of the candidates, what have you, I do think there's too many independent voters who are eager to push Trump out the door. And now that Biden's gone as well, for Trump to be able to win in that context. So really, I think that's the essence of this is are voters talking about the issues when they go to the polls or about to mail in a vote, or are they thinking about other matters?
All right. That's a great place to close it out, I think, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for listening. That's going to do it for our show this week. We're always glad to be with you. And if you want to know more about the work that we do at the Claremont Institute, you can visit our various websites, including CRV, which I mentioned by way of talking about Jeff's pieces in there. We've got a new issue coming out very soon, the summer issue, and you can find that and subscribe to get it when it's available at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. We also, of course, have our own website that we run, The American Mind, at americanmind.org. And you can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. If you want to donate to support the work that we do, we would be most grateful. It's always a huge help when you do that in amounts large or small. It's claremont.org/donate to make that happen. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to you all one more time for listening. We will talk to you next week.